Hello, teachers and students. My name is Mrs. Clavon. I teach AP Literature and Composition, as well as Teacher Pathway at Lincoln High School in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This video was put together as part of a series from Poetry Out Loud to encourage students and teachers to read, recite, interpret, write about poetry in the classroom. If you are like me, perhaps your students feel that poetry as a genre can be rather daunting. So it's my goal that we can work through some strategies for reading and writing and thinking and reciting that help us turn the daunting into something delightful. We have several strategies for understanding and interpreting poetry, and I think the first and most crucial one is reading the text multiple times and in varied ways. It is an unfair assumption for us to ask our students to read a poem and understand it the first time. Let's be real, that can't happen. Instead, reading poetry several times and in varied ways helps us to really unearth the poet's meaning and move from the literal to metaphorical level. The next part of our understanding a poem then starts with noticing, and so we want to notice. We want to pay attention to these kind of elements that we might see in the poem. We want to look for the shifts that occur in structure, in idea, in point of view, or characterization. We want to look for the contrasts in terms of language or even structure. We want to look for repetitions of structure and language, which lead us to maybe even similarities or thinking about the patterns that we see. This seems like a lot, doesn't it? So let's just focus our attention on something simple. In this video, we're going to work with the text to read it multiple times and in varied ways, and then we'll focus just on shifts. Our goal in understanding poetry, since poetry is the best words in the best order, is for us to move from our literal understanding toward a metaphorical one. And that can be difficult, especially if we don't have a firm and clear understanding in that literal level. So some suggestions for you as you approach a new poem are to read the text and then just read it several times. And I have some varied ways that you might read the text. Something that works really well for me and for my students are to try to read it backwards. We try reading one voice in the room. We try having maybe all the girls read it together, or all the boys read this stanza, or maybe we have two rows read one stanza and then another. And then I think important too to listen to reading in your own head and try annotating, that is interacting with the text and the poet by writing in the margins, just writing your thinking. And I know some of my students are like, well, I don't know what to write about. Even if you start with summarizing what you think is happening or asking a question, you are interacting with the text, and that's important. Okay, let's talk about what that literal level means. So when I talk about a literal level, it means we look at the poem and figure out what's happening here, like what's going on. We look at what is actually happening. And perhaps the best way for us to practice is to look at a specific text. So I've chosen the poem Christmas 1970 by Sandra Castillo. And this text will allow us, I think, it's a rich text, so it will allow us lots of opportunities to interpret and find all of those elements that we're looking for. I'm going to navigate to the Poetry Out Loud site. For us, a great place to find poetry. I love the organization of this site because you can browse for poems by the poet's name or by title or even collection. So let's take a look at Christmas 1970 by Sandra Castillo. We assemble the silver tree, our translated lives, its luminous branches, numbered to fit into its body, place its metallic roots to decorate our first Christmas. Mother finds herself opening, closing the Red Cross box she will carry into 1976 like an unwanted door prize, a timepiece, a stubborn fact, an emblem of exile measuring our days, marked by the moment of our departure, our lives no longer arranged. Somewhere there is a photograph. A Polaroid mother cannot remember was ever taken. I am sitting under Tia Tere's Christmas tree, her first apartment in this, our new world. My sister's by my side. I wear a white dress, black boots, an 8-year-old's resignation. May and Mitzi, age 4, wear red and white snowflake sweaters and identical smiles on this, our first Christmas, away from ourselves. The future unreal, unmade. Mother will cry into the new year with Lydia and Emerito, our elderly downstairs neighbors, who realize what we are too young to understand. Even a map cannot show you the way back to a place that no longer exists. So I would ask you to read this text again. You've heard it and followed along. This would be time for you to read that text again and again. It might be that you print the text and write all over the margins. It could be that you read it aloud in class or just read it in the mirror. It could be that you share that experience and read it back and forth, or do some class reading, but read it several times and in varied ways. That's our first step. Read several times and in varied ways. Once you've read this text several times, like more than twice, I'm talking like 4 or 5 times, okay? Read it several times. Then it's time for us to start noticing. So we have a sense of the whole of Castillo's poem, and now we can really zoom in on its parts. This video is going to focus on zooming in on the shifts. Now, shifts are simply allow us to pay attention to the movement of a poem. If we consider that a stanza is a poem's paragraph, sometimes it's useful for us to look at the stanzas and the stanza breaks that occur. That will be useful in our understanding of Castillo's poem. But shifts don't have to occur only with stanzas. You might also consider that there is movement, shifting to a new perspective, a new sentence even, a new point of view, a new emotion. So you might mark those places in your poem. You could use a slash or just a line to indicate that there is some sort of shift. I'm going to use an arrow this afternoon to indicate that I'm shifting and identifying the stanza shifts. So I have the first 2 stanzas of Castillo's poem with the arrow at the bottom. We have this first stanza. We assemble the silver tree, our translated lives, its luminous branches, numbered to fit into its body. Place its metallic roots to decorate our first Christmas. Mother finds herself opening, closing the Red Cross box she will carry into 1976 like an unwanted door prize, a timepiece, a stubborn fact, an emblem of exile measuring our days, marked by the moment of our departure, our lives no longer arranged. And then there is a shift to a new stanza, and check it out, this word, this somewhere, as it stands alone, it has its own line, also signals a shift for us. It is a transition word, a shift to a different time and place. So we can look for, yes, those shifts that occur between stanzas, but we might also look for them within a stanza too. Something for you now to write about on your poem or to think about and talk about in class as you look at these shifts. Does this shift in stanza finish a thought, like a paragraph? Does it suggest a different focus? Does it transition to a new idea? And would it change the pacing of our reading for recitation? Would we change how we read this poem aloud? So do some thinking and writing about that text and maybe talking with others and see what you can come up with. I'll also put on the screen the last stanza of Castillo's poem. You can see I put an arrow above it because there is a shift into that stanza as well. What is the new idea here that ends this piece? What is the different focus that comes at the end? And especially, what kind of shift exists here with the way that the poet prefaces the last lines. Even a map cannot show you the way back to a place that no longer exists. How is it that that shift to those last lines becomes crucial to the poem? Okay, so those strategies, reading several times and then looking at the shifts, can help us to understand the gist. And that's the first part of our work, understanding the literal interpretation. So after you've read several times, after you've looked at the shifts of the text and considered the impact of those shifts, then it's time to bring your thinking together. This is the time when you might write about the gist of this poem. This poem tells the story of, and complete that sentence, and then get our shifts in there. The poet shifts from what to what. So I'm giving you those kind of sentence frames to start your thinking, but you could take it from there. Okay, friends, that's our work for today. We read the text. I read it aloud a couple of times and encouraged you to read it in varied ways. And then we started our noticing, focusing on shifts. Next time, we'll take a look at the next strategies that can help us in moving from the literal to the metaphorical. Take care.